If we deal with the second point first, actually that was discussed and debated at the hearing
Yeah.
on Tuesday. The
Yeah.
slightly strange procedure from my point of view, just trying to understand how legislation gets passed, is that the first reading of the bill, so it's the first attempt at getting it right, went before the whole of the Holyrood Parliament.
Right.
The second one goes to this reviewing committee, which oversees local government issues and so on, and they have been doing incredible work
Right.
on it. And I have had to give evidence several times at Holyrood. Indeed, the committee actually decided that they would leave Holyrood and come and look at the building, so they came and had one of their committee meetings here in our home, and then walked around the building. So they've been thorough,
Yeah.
and they have not been a rubber stamp on the suggestions coming from government. So the issue of essentially people marking their own homework
Yep.
has been pretty thoroughly discussed.
Yeah.
And one of an architect, a leading architect, giving evidence at Holyrood, actually, when I was there, actually referred to this, marking your own homework.
Yeah.
And most owners, no, perhaps I shouldn't say most owners, I will speak for myself and people I've spoken with, are very concerned about that. And one of the MSPs from Glasgow actually raised this point at the Holyrood Committee, where the second stage was dealt with on Tuesday, and raised it quite firmly, seeking to change the bill as it stands to make sure that this is actually overseen more tightly and dealt with perhaps slightly with regulation in a perhaps tighter way than is currently envisaged. And it is a real concern. Why would you trust them? Now,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to slag anyone off particularly, but it's just, as you say, you immediately jumped on that. Surely there's a conflict of interest here. And if you are in a commercial situation where you are working for a company, and yes, you've got professional standards, and you have been asked, and they've got to be people who qualify in a specified way, and you've got to work with integrity. But there is a huge conflict when, Joe Bloggs Limited is paying your salary. Do I mention this? This is going to cost a lot of money. Can we get away with doing less? Those are the sort of thoughts that go through people's minds, and obviously through yours. And I think to say it's not resolved, whilst the issue was raised, the MSP who raised it agreed to postpone it until the final hearing, and the housing minister agreed to hear and listen further. And we'll have to see what they come up with. So we haven't got a long time scale here. This is about another month before it comes
Before
back.
the final reading. Yeah.
So it's pretty quick. And there are very substantial issues in here. Your first question about where there are no longer, the companies don't exist, and they're described as orphan buildings. So as with the example in Aberdeen, the monies that came from Westminster, and there are further monies to come, and will all be used in the process of the single building assessment, but they were used to pay for the actual work.
Yeah.
And that money has been used as well in other developments. There have been at least one development where the assessment raised such serious issues that there had to be a decision as to whether or not they should evacuate the building.
Wow.
You can imagine a high-rise building in Glasgow with a lot of people in it. That's one big effort to undertake. So they actually put in and paid for a waking watch, and that money was used from that fund. So the
Okay.
idea is that where there are orphan buildings and the builders no longer exist, then that money would go to meet that. And there is also to be a levy that is to be is still being worked out as to how the building companies will pay for that. So that's in the current legislation. The thing is that where some and it's quite common, and as you know, my past history was that I was a liquidator and receiver, so it was quite common that companies were set up as a single development company. So,
Yeah.
you know, you would have one for this particular building, and
Yep.
then you'd have another for another building. That wasn't particularly unusual, and
Yeah.
it wasn't meant necessarily to be deceptive. It was a mechanism for the way in which some companies operated. And
You can
when the
understand. You can
building,
understand that to a certain point of view as well, because if you've got a building that's maybe not going too well, then the rest of the, they can keep it separate. Yeah, you can understand why they would do
so
it.
that's part of the reason. And so, and again, when the development has been completed, that company no longer has a purpose.
Yeah.
It was for that purpose. Therefore, you put it to bed, and get struck off, wound up,
Yeah.
and off they go. Now
Yeah.
the problem is where you have groups of companies, and I'm aware of a case where there was just such a development, and the single purpose company that was set up in fact went into administration. It's quite a huge block. So, for example, in the tallest stair in that building, it was meant to have two lifts. So, but because they ran out of money, they only got one,
Oh.
and they had to get someone else in to finish everything off, and it was a mess.
Yeah.
And that company was in administration, but it was part of a group of companies which
Yeah.
still exists, still runs, and are currently bidding and proposing to do another development nearby in the same area. Now,
Mm.
this is where it gets a bit muddy, and the Scottish Government are very aware of this, that really just isn't right.
Yeah. No, it's not
So,
at all. Is it?
again, speaking with my insolvency practitioner hat on, the whole thing is that the word limited or public limited company at the end of the title of the company means that if there are problems, the people who are owed money can only look to the assets of that company to meet those bills.
Yeah.
So it's ring fencing everything.
Yeah.